Good morning. Man, you guys sound a little more awake than the 9 o'clock did. I can tell you, like the 9 o'clock are my people. That's where I spend a whole lot of time. But you guys are ready today, aren't you? Yeah. I am too. I'm excited to be with you. I'm excited. Been looking forward to this for a while. There's something about having the opportunity to open God's word and just share it. And it's my prayer that you'll get everything God's got for you today. I have to tell you that being here in this spot is a little surreal for me. Many of you know that lost my wife back on May 25th. So it was 8 days ago that I stood right here for her celebration of life service. And so I get to reflect on that privilege and understand that God has been so faithful in his goodness to me, to us. And I've been loved by so many people, many in this room, that the blessing that I have to stand here today is enormous. But I want you to understand though, right? I look the same, I sound the same, I'm not the same. And that's okay, right? God is so good. I say all of that just to ask you, if you would, just pray that God's going to do what God's going to do, that I can do my part adequately for him to do his part excellently. I just don't want to be in the way today. With all that said, and you doing what you will do, are you ready for part 2 of Summer Stories with Jesus? Yep. All right. Listen, I like stories. I was thinking about the fact that great storytelling has pulled me into some incredibly long fiction book series. Anybody with me? Yep. Like you start with one book and next thing you know, you're 6 books in. It's like, what in the world? It was the storytelling. You begin to identify with those characters, and next thing, I could tell you what I've read, but then you'd judge me, so we won't go there. The reality is that as I think about summer stories with Jesus, my mind went to another kind of storytelling, a very creative, unique sort of storytelling, one that I don't think has ever really been duplicated. It was the storytelling of Dr. Seuss, right? Unique, creative, impacted lots of folks. So like we had all the books, my kids, many, many years ago, loved Dr. Seuss. We had this is how long ago, we had a VHS cassette of Dr. Seuss stories. So that got me thinking about stories. And so I went to the Google machine and I asked, hey, what are the top 5 Dr. Seuss books, right? Anybody interested? Is it just me? I'm the only one that cared. You're stuck because I've got to share them with you. Right? These are the top 5. What I think happened when I Googled top 5 best-selling Dr. Seuss books, I'm pretty sure that Google turned around and asked ChatGPT because that's what everyone does. Wherever the answer came from, here we go. Anybody got a guess on number 1? Green eggs and ham. Oh, red fish, blue fish. I heard Cat in the Hat. Number 5. Oh, the places you'll go. Right? I think that it's going to continue to rise because it gets a lot of attention every graduation season, right? Number 4, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. I always liked it. Number 3, it has a special place in my heart because I memorized this whole book for my kids. They didn't care. My daughter is here with me today, and I asked her if she knew that I memorized. No, didn't even. But the kids at camp, they liked it, that I could recite the whole thing. Number 3, Dr. Seuss's ABCs. Okay, big A, little a. What begins with A? Aunt Annie's alligators. A. Yeah. I don't know whether to go number 2 or number 1 because it's really down to 2. Right? So we'll go with number 2. Number 2, The Cat in the Hat. Leaving number one, bunch of you got it. Green eggs and ham. Sounds disgusting, but whatever. That's Dr. Seuss. Enough silliness, right? This entire summer is spent with stories. Jesus was fond of telling stories. The stories that he would tell almost always had a point. But there was almost always a meaning beyond the point of the story. That's what made them what we call parables, right? Parable feels like a churchy word, but all it really means is there's a story that has a point, and then there's a meaning beyond that point. And with Jesus, it was almost always spiritual, and it was almost always valuable. And like I'm saying almost, of course, what Jesus said was valuable. But this is a story that if you're here for the first time, maybe you're here for the first time in a long time in a church, this is a story that you're probably familiar with, which might be good. Even if you've not heard the story, you're familiar with the concept because we have laws named for it. We have clubs associated with it. I get the honor of sharing the parable of the Good Samaritan. So, to get into this story, there's an interaction that Jesus has with a fella that sets up the story. So we've got to go through the interaction, okay? And I think the characters involved in the interaction matter to the story as well. So let's jump in. This is Luke chapter 10. We're going to begin in verse 25. And it says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? There's some good stuff right there. But there are some context clues that tell us that this conversation was not just a casual, friendly conversation. A couple fellas just sitting down, a cold iced tea, maybe some Dr. Pepper. That's not what's happening here. How do we know? How do we know this is not that kind of conversation? A few things in the text tell us. The first thing is, it tells us that this question is coming from an expert in the law. That sounds impressive, doesn't it? An expert in the law. This guy's got something going on. He sure did. There are some things that I think we can assume because we hear about other experts in the law. We hear about teachers of the law. They seem to have some very similar characteristics, each one as we go along. So I make some assumptions about this fella. The fact that he's called an expert in the law probably means he's pretty smart. You don't get to be an expert in anything, right, if you don't have something going on. So I think he's pretty smart. I think that he's pretty religious. What's he an expert in? The law. He's not a cop. We're not talking about right and wrong like behavior civilly. We're talking about the Old Testament Jewish law. Does that make sense? So he's smart. He's religious. He is probably used to being right. Do you know anybody like that? Just used to being right? They're fabulous. Unfortunately, sometimes they come across, I'm sure they're not, but sometimes people who are used to being right come across as being a little arrogant. So here we've got this fella who is smart, religious, used to being right, so he's arrogant. That leads us to guess that he's probably not asking this question because he wants the answer. He's asking this question because he thinks he knows the answer, right? He's not a seeker of truth. In this moment, he's a seeker of attention, right? The other thing that we know, the reason we know this is not just one of those conversations is by how Luke explains what he did. They're not just sitting around having a conversation. What does it say? It says the expert in the law stood up. Not just stood up to ask his question, but he stood up to test Jesus. This guy's looking for a fight. This guy thinks, I believe, he thinks that Jesus is a fraud. I think that he thinks Jesus is a heretic. I think he thinks that he's the man for the job of knocking Jesus down a peg, putting Jesus in his place. So he stands up, gets his chest out. I'm the man. I'm going to take care of this heretic. And so he asks his question, right? The other thing that tells me this is not just an easy conversation is the fact that after the first question, he follows up. Why did he follow up? Luke tells us. He wanted to justify himself. This is not about Jesus. This is not about truth. This is about him. So with that in mind, how do you feel about the expert in the law right now? You like him? No, I don't like him either. I kind of think he's a little despicable. We'll get back to him a little bit later. We're about to get to where Jesus actually tells the story, and I want to read just straight through it so we're all on the same page as maybe we go a little deeper. Maybe we can find that meaning beyond the point. But there are a couple things that I want to share with you, some details I want to give you, because everybody listening to Jesus as he tells this story, they already know these things, but we don't know them. All right. First of all, this story is told about a road that runs from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay. Jerusalem is a pretty important place, yes? Jericho, not as important. Elevation-wise, just geography, Jerusalem is a city literally on a hill. And from Jerusalem to Jericho, it's almost all downhill, just elevation. It's interesting that the people that are traveling this road in this story are all going down from Jerusalem. Everybody hearing this story knows that this road from Jerusalem to Jericho is about 18 miles long. So we're talking about an investment. If you're going to be on this road, if that's your intent, this is not like an easy hike. This is a trek. It's kind of a big deal, right? The other thing is that you don't make those kind of treks without purpose. There's got to be a reason. Nobody is walking this road just because, hey, let's just go down to Jericho for the weekend. No, that's not what this road was. This road also, once you got out of Jerusalem, before you got to Jericho, was almost all remote. It's what we would call a desert, very rocky terrain. Because of all of those details, everybody listening to this story knew that this road was considered very dangerous. It's the kind of place, specifically because of the remoteness and the rocks, is the kind of place that people got attacked a lot. People get robbed. People get beaten. People would be killed on this road. So with those things in mind, you might ask the question, why is anybody on this road? Well, as we get to the story, we're going to find out that two of the people we're going to talk about are religious leaders. This is where Jerusalem being important comes into play. Jerusalem is the center of the Jewish faith. It's where the temple is. All the important stuff happened in Jerusalem. So if we're talking about priests, we're talking about Levites, we're talking about church leaders, they would go from wherever they lived, Jericho, any place around Jericho, and they would travel up that road to Jerusalem to do whatever it was they had to do. And whatever they did in Jerusalem was a big deal for them. There was, for the religious elite, there was glory to be had in Jerusalem, not so much Jericho. All of these pieces come together to set up for the hearers of this story a picture that they knew well, a picture we don't know so well, but we don't have to know it well. I hope that context gives you a little insight as Jesus tells the story. With all of that said, are you ready for the second installment of Summer Stories with Jesus? Verse 30, Luke chapter 10. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place where the man was, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Boom, mic drop. The guy's asking the question because he wants the attention. Jesus tells a story that even the expert in the law couldn't get wrong. So listen, if we're gathered here today and our intent is to get an intellectual understanding of who your neighbor is, we can go home now. Should we stop here? Yes. We've got the point. We've got the point, but have we got the parable? No. See, I think Jesus is telling this story for a much bigger purpose than just who's your neighbor. I can't say that without thinking Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers needs to be out here singing, putting on his sweater, shoes, whatever. Right? What is the meaning of this story? Because I think it's more than the point that your neighbor is, your definition of neighbor should be broader than it probably is, right? Can we agree that there's more to it? Look, do you remember the man's first question that he asked Jesus? What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus didn't answer the question, did he? He turned it back around and let the expert in the law answer the question. The expert in the law did well, right? He gave the right answer. Does that mean the expert in the law understood the answer he gave? Have you ever given an answer that was right that you didn't quite understand why it was right? Listen, I think that Jesus may have told this story to illustrate the answer to the first question while answering the second question. Right? The man answered his own question the first time with the Old Testament law in Deuteronomy. He said, the way I inherit eternal life is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Is it possible that this story is Jesus showing us what does love for God and love for man look like? It's a big question. What does love for God and love for man look like? It's pretty easy to answer the question here. Am I right? We can probably come up with a list. Oh, yeah, this is what it looks like. I promise you, the priest and the Levite in the story had answers to that question. The problem was they didn't do such a great job of living out those answers they had in their heads. I think the most powerful thing about this story is that you and I are in it. Did you see yourself? I know I'm in it. I'm wondering if you saw yourself in it. We're going to talk about it a little bit. Maybe as we talk about it, you'll see yourself a little more clearly. How many characters are there in the story? 6. 6, right? 3 of them are kind of like extras that they're needed to tell the story, but it's not about them, right? The robber, the innkeeper, and the man who was beaten. They're kind of extras, right? But if we think about it, you probably identify with at least one of those too, right? Robbers, you might be somebody who in your past, you've left beaten, broken, wounded people in your wake. It might be that you're an innkeeper, kind of a secondary sort of level of support. Like you don't go out looking to help people, but kind of part of your job, whatever, is to help people that are brought to you. That's fantastic, great. I think all of us, right? If you haven't seen yourself yet, I think all of us can identify with the beaten man. Hasn't life been rough on you? There have been moments where you have been beaten, you've been stripped, you've been left half dead, and you've wondered, how am I going to get out of this, right? The thing about this man is he was in desperate need, but he had no resources to pay for the help that he needed. Have you been there? I have been. In very real ways, I still am. But those 3 characters, they're extras. The story is not about them. It's interesting that we find ourselves in them. No, the story is about the other 3 characters, right? Main characters. Who are they? The priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. You can probably identify with one of those 2. If you can't yet, I think you will. Because as we look at the background of each one, we start with the priest. It's pretty self-explanatory, right? For us, the priest is the professional Christian. Think pastor, right? They were in the hierarchy of the Jewish faith. They were the pinnacle. They were the ones that everybody looked to when they had a question about church, when they had a question about the Old Testament law. They were the ones, right? They were the ones that would stand up in the synagogue and they would teach, and they would give all of the insight. They were the ones setting the example. This is what it looks like to be a Jew. Does that make sense? Now, this priest in this story, from my perspective, isn't so stellar. So when I tell you think like a pastor, don't think Clint. Think about some other pastor that you don't really like. There are enough of those in headlines through the years that we don't have to think too hard, right? But you're with me. Professional Christian. Expectations, obligations. Then we get to the Levite. And the Levite's a little harder to explain. Like, you already knew what a priest was. You may not know what a Levite is. Priests came from the tribe of Levi. And if you were born into the tribe of Levi and your lineage was from Aaron, who was the first priest God chose, then you were a priest. Being a priest was not something you chose. It's something that chose you. And it was all by that line. Are you with me? Levites were the people born into the tribe of Levi that were not from the line of Aaron. Okay? So there may be, I don't know this, but there may have been some competition there. Like, well, I could be just as good a priest as he could, except my dad isn't, right? All that stuff. So Levites, in general, tended, because of being from that tribe of priests, they tended to be religious. They tended to kind of lean into fulfilling the other roles in the Jewish temple functioning, the way the synagogues worked. So they would be servants, they would do all kinds of stuff, but they weren't priests. Levites also tended to be the ones that would go into, because they didn't have necessarily all the other responsibilities. They were the ones that would become teachers of the law and experts in the law. Are you picking up what I'm laying down? Sound like somebody we've already met? okay? So you've got a priest, you've got expectations of the priest. You've got a Levite, but you don't know what to think about the Levite. If you are somebody who's been a longtime follower of Jesus, you spent a lot of time in church, maybe you went to Sunday school, right? Depending on your background, maybe you understand elders and deacons and Sunday school teachers. Those folks in our world would be Levites, right? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It should be a good thing, right? And then we got the Samaritan. The Samaritan is a nobody. He's just an ordinary person, has no connection, really, to anything religious. Being a Samaritan just meant that he was from an area called Samaria. It used to be a part of Israel, the northern kingdom, if you care about any of that stuff. But they were, Assyria came in and overthrew all of Israel. In this area of Samaria, they shipped off almost all of the people, all the Jews, and they brought in foreigners to inhabit that land. So the few Jews that were left, they just intermarried, and they compromised all of their strict Jewish beliefs. And what resulted was basically another religion, if you will. Same God, different rules, different attention to things, had different place of worship. The whole structure was different. Guess what the Jews thought about the Samaritans? Nothing. Good, anyway. They didn't like them. They saw them as a half-breed. They saw them as compromised. They saw them as worse than a foreigner. They were connected. They should know better. So how did the Samaritans feel about the Jews? They always felt judged. They always felt looked down on. Bottom line, generations of differences, generations of judgments. They didn't get along, and you didn't need any more information than Jew-Samaritan conflict. You with me? We can take those three definitions, those three backgrounds, and we can tell this story that Jesus told in a way that makes sense. We would start with the Samaritan, and we would say, hey, the Samaritan gets off scot-free. Why should the Samaritan worry about this Jew on the side of the road who hates him just because of where he's from, right? There's no expectation that the Samaritan should do anything for a Jew. We let him off the hook. Second, we think about the Levite, and we think, well, the Levite, religious guy, ought to do something, but we can kind of give him a pass too. Why? Because it's not really his job, right? He's just, he could do better, but do we really expect him to get involved? Probably not, right? It's where so many of us fall, right? We think, oh, I'm a pretty good Christian. How many times have I passed by somebody? So we kind of give the Levite a pass as well. But then we get to the priest. What's the expectation of everybody in this room for the priest? The priest should have done something. The priest should have had compassion. The priest should have loved this man and helped him. Am I right? But the priest doesn't. He passes by on the other side. This is the thing that we don't understand, is that the priest, because of all of the beauty of how the Jewish laws were interpreted and the way the whole structure was set up, that the priest had all kinds of legal mumbo jumbo that would give them loopholes to dismiss acting in this kind of situation, right? So the priest could walk by and could see that man and think, gosh, I should help him. And then he would think, wait a minute, I can't tell if he's alive or dead. And if he's dead and I touch him, then I will be ceremonially unclean. And that would just be a bad deal, because then I'd have to go through all this stuff, and I couldn't do my responsibilities. And who knows, this guy could just be, it could be a trap, that the bandits are still waiting on me and I'm too important to risk myself to help him. And besides that, I'm busy. I'm dreadfully busy. I'm much, much too busy for you. Right? It all makes sense to the priest. That's why he can pass by on the other side. The expert in the law would know that. Would say, yeah, I get it. He was important. The Levite, right? Good church guy. Doesn't have nearly the excuses that the priest has. But you know what I think the Levite thought? When he saw that guy, he thought, boy, that looks rough. I'll pray for him. It was a thoughts and prayers kind of moment for the Levite, right? That's what church people do. We see the need, and man, we lift it up. Listen, I'm not discouraging thoughts and prayers. I'm just telling you. Sometimes they can be an excuse, yes? As far as the Samaritan goes, listen, there's no expectation. There is no reason for this man to involve himself, except that apparently he loved God and he loved people. Even people who, if the roles were reversed, would not stop. Or if they did stop, they would stop helping as soon as they found out he was a Samaritan. Didn't stop him, right? He goes, he sees, he invests in meeting this man's need. So who's the neighbor? That's the question, right? It's obvious. The Samaritan was the neighbor, but what's our takeaway? If you leave here today and the only thing you leave with is an expanded definition of who your neighbor should be, I've failed. Because that was the point Jesus was making, not the meaning he was giving. I think what Jesus was saying to them and to us is that you can't hide behind excuses, even religious ones, if you claim to love God. You came here today, most of you because you claim to love God. Some of you because you're trying to figure out if God is somebody worthy of loving. I think in this story, we know that the Samaritan shows us what it looks like to love God and to love people. Yes? Is it possible that Jesus told this story so that we would have a skin-on, real-life picture of what Jesus came to do? Think about it for just a second. Jesus was the Samaritan. You're the beaten man. Jesus shows up and he has no obligation to help you at all. What did you ever do for him? Nothing. Nothing. And yet, he has come to you. He has sought you out. He has seen your wounds. He has seen the damage done to you. And he steps down and he's poured on the oil. He's poured on the wine. He has bandaged you up. He has put you on his donkey. He has taken you to the inn, and he has left the deposit to meet every need you have. And Jesus is telling a story about who our neighbors are. And he's saying, listen, you can't hide behind your excuses, religious or otherwise, because to love God is to love people. Amen. The question is never which people. It's the wrong question. Which people did Jesus die on the cross for? All of them. Where do we get off asking who's my neighbor? The question isn't which people. Jesus, as he's telling this story, he's thinking, I am on my way to the cross on Calvary. where I'm going to die a brutal death that I want no part of. Right? He knows this is coming. And he's going to make that trip to that cross for that Samaritan that the priest and the Levite hated. To me, what's even more amazing is he's going to make that trip to that cross for the priest and the Levite who had just butchered and misrepresented the law that he came to fulfill. What's even better is that in that moment, he is looking at a man who props himself up as an expert in the law, whose purpose there is to bring Jesus down. And as he's telling this story, Jesus knows, I'm going to the cross to die for that man. Which people is always the wrong question. And this teaching is tough because Jesus tears down every excuse. Every excuse that I try to hide behind to avoid serving others. Listen, I have been the priest. I have been a professional Christian most of my life. And right, there are times that I get in my head, I've got too many important things to do to help that person with that need. What? Yeah. I've been the Levite. I've engaged in religious arguments and making points and doing religious things, all while ignoring the people right in front of me that needed me to just be the hands and feet of Jesus. Thankfully, there have been moments that I've been the Samaritan as well. Those moments when I fought through my selfishness, I put aside my ego, I set down my rhetoric, and I simply asked, what would Jesus do? And I did that. Those have been the moments that I've been the Samaritan. Listen, we're going to wrap up with two questions. If you were here last week, this is exactly how Clint ended. He asked two questions. And the first question is really important. It's an important question. Where are you in this story? Where are you in this story? Now, we ask that question, oh, yeah, okay. But isn't it so much easier to point a finger at somebody else you saw in the story? It's like, look at, yeah, I saw Bill, he's just like that Levite. I'll tell you what, pass by on the other side, he should know better. Don't do it. Don't point a finger at somebody else. You identify where you are. And I think it's a powerful question. But question two is so much better. You know what it is? Where do you want to be in the story? Where do you want to be? Man, if I've done anything right today, the answer is I want to be the Samaritan, right? I want to be the Samaritan. I want to love God enough, to love people enough, to serve them in a way that meets their need. I want to be the Samaritan. Let's follow up that question. What will it take for you to become the good Samaritan in the lives of the people around you? It doesn't do us any good to come in here and sit. It doesn't do any good to sing. It doesn't do us any good to think. The only thing that's going to matter is that whether we take this story that Jesus told beyond its point, down to its meaning, and do what he said to do. He said, go and do likewise. Let's do that. Listen, the details of your life and the things that you have to do, the specifics might be different person to person, but the general answer is the same for every one of us. If we want to be good neighbors who actually love God, we must be willing to be inconvenienced for the benefit of others. Right? This is Foundation's definition of service. Clint speaks it often. We must be willing to be inconvenienced for the benefit of others. We live in a society where convenience is king. I remember when my household got our first microwave. It was a big deal. Those microwave dinners were terrible. We didn't know it. It was cool. Push a button, man, 3 minutes. I love convenience. You do too, right? We're spending our lives trying to get as much convenience around us as possible. And I'm not mad at it. But when we prioritize our convenience over meeting needs of real people in front of us, it ought to lead us to ask a question about the legitimacy of our love for God. Is that too harsh? I don't think so. Because if we're not willing to love people where they are and do what we can to meet their needs, I have to question whether we really love God or not. Because as I said before, right, to love God is to love people. I don't think you get one without the other. The priest and the Levite, they couldn't be inconvenienced to help this man. The Samaritan, he chose to be significantly inconvenienced, right? He offered up open-handedly his time, his effort, his resources, his donkey, his money, his attention. He gave them. He was inconvenienced. And what I see in him is that he was a good lover of God. Do you want to be a good lover of God? I do too. It's a decision that we can make. It's a path that we can choose. But I want to be very clear that if you choose to love God, you will have to choose to love people. And if you love people, you don't get to choose which ones. And I can guarantee you, 100% sure, that if you love people, you will be inconvenienced in meeting needs they have. My challenge to you today is to choose to love God enough, to love people enough to serve them. Did you hear it? Will you love God enough to love people enough to serve them? I think that's why Jesus told the story. He wanted us to know what it looked like to love God and to love people.